Claire had always dreamed of getting married, a desire strongly influenced by her mother. No man stayed with her for more than 6 months, which made Claire feel unhappy. Her mother instilled in her that the key to a successful life is a successful marriage. From a very young age, she had heard her mother's constant reminders of the importance of marriage. She believed that if she took good care of her husband, she would live a blissful life. Absorbing these admonitions like a sponge, she was filled with joy when Jackson proposed to her. For Claire, it felt like the pinnacle of happiness. Jackson first met Claire in a park where she sat sobbing and trying to rub paint off her jeans. Their love quickly blossomed, and when they announced their engagement, no one was surprised. Wedding plans were set in motion. Claire soon gave birth to 2 children and immersed herself in domestic life. She strived to be the perfect wife, putting herself out to the best of her ability despite her fatigue. Jackson was constantly pleased with her efforts. At her mother's insistence, a delicious hot dinner was always prepared for her husband at home as soon as he arrived. The children would go to bed and kiss their father on the cheek, after which the couple would retire to enjoy each other's company. The man probably bragged about his better half to his friends and colleagues who sincerely envied him. However, behind closed doors, instead of love and warmth, his beloved often showered him with reproaches and moralizing. When their son was 5 years old and their daughter 3, Claire had the opportunity to go to work. However, this required her to gain further qualifications. Before that, she had graduated in economics and worked in a firm for 6 months before going on maternity leave. After 5 years of endless childcare, Claire was desperate to get out into the world again. Although she wouldn't admit it to anyone, she was sick of domestic life. She was tired of serving as a housekeeper, wiping runny noses, and pretending to be happy when Jackson came home. Secretly, she followed the lives of her old high school and university friends, who were thoroughly enjoying their youth, partying, and socializing. Claire's socializing was limited to other moms on the playground. Despite this, she secretly decided to enroll in a course and continue working without informing her husband. It was at the training center that she met Henry. He was their accounting instructor, and Claire immediately fell in love with his statuesque and handsome figure. Henry also noticed the charming Claire, who sat at the counter and listened attentively to him for an hour and a half. After class, he caught up with her on the street, and they began to talk. It was Friday, and all weekend Claire couldn't get rid of her thoughts about her teacher. Their relationship began to grow. Love had taken over her so much that sometimes she forgot about her husband and children. With the arrival of her new love, she neglected cooking dinner for the first time in their years of marriage. When Jackson came home and found nothing on the table but an empty candy dish, he was very surprised. His wife, who had actually spent the entire day with her lover on social media, claimed she had a terrible headache. That was the first excuse. 3 weeks later, when their son fell ill, Claire had to confess to her husband about attending the training. He was surprised, grumbled, but eventually accepted her decision and asked his mother to help with the grandchildren. While her mother-in-law looked after the children, Claire plunged into Henry's arms. Jackson began to worry because of the sudden change in his wife's behavior. She was constantly failing to make dinner, she was sleep-deprived, and, as a result, she had no time to get her husband ready for work, let alone fulfill her marital duties. Jackson could not remember the last time he had intimacy with his wife. He was angry, filled with silent resentment, and unable to find a sense of happiness. For the first time in their time together, Claire and Jackson began to quarrel. "I forbid you to go to work," he shouted in the midst of a heated argument. "You don't own me," muttered his wife in response. There had never been such a commotion in their house before. Claire and Jackson had always been critical of their friends who argued with each other, believing that there should never be such disagreements between spouses. Their relationship was disgustingly perfect. However, as their studies came to an end, they realized that it would be increasingly difficult for them to spend time together. Claire broached the subject of leaving her husband to be with Henry, but his lack of enthusiasm made her back down. She realized that she couldn't count on anything. After all, they were only lovers, and she knew very little about him. He might even have a family of his own. She didn't want to go back to an unloving husband, but she couldn't leave Jackson either. She needed help with her children. She couldn't raise them alone. She found out about her unplanned pregnancy too late. Right before she went to work, The gynecologist congratulated her on the news. She was stunned and fainted in the chair. When she came to, she sobbed for hours in the clinic hallway, realizing that abortion was not an option. She was terrified, especially because she was almost certain that the baby had nothing to do with her husband. For the rest of the week, she agonized over how to confess her situation to both men. As she pondered how to proceed with the confession and debated whether to start with Jackson or Henry, fate made the decision for her. When Claire returned home from the hospital that afternoon, she absent-mindedly put the ultrasound file among other papers in her desk drawer. It had never occurred to Jackson to go through the drawer on his own before. He usually relied on his wife for help. But after their recent argument, he'd been so upset with Claire that he went through the drawer on his own. His eyes rested on the ultrasound image, and as he looked through the document and noted the description of the pregnancy, he couldn't help but wonder whether the images belonged to his daughter or his son. When he saw the date on the study, he was at a loss for words. Walking over to his wife, he handed her the sheet and demanded an explanation. Tears came to Claire's eyes and she whispered, "I'm pregnant." Jackson was overjoyed at first and hugged his wife fondly. However, Claire continued to cry, and suddenly, amidst her sobs, she blurted out, "It's not yours. I don't love you." Shocked and hurt, Jackson flared up but managed to control himself, limiting his reaction to harsh words. Claire tearfully told her husband the truth, and Jackson packed his things and left the apartment that evening. She later confided in Henry, who, upon learning of the situation, coldly stated that he would not recognize the child. "Claire, I have a family," he tried to explain. "I don't need your child. Get together with your husband and find a way to raise him." Hearing his words, Claire felt a wave of nausea come over her. She couldn't understand such a suggestion. Both men had abandoned her, plunging her into her worst nightmare. Now she was left alone with 3 children. Pain and resentment consumed her, making her scream with despair. She couldn't imagine the outcome and couldn't come to terms with her new life. Jackson did his best to help with the children, but Claire couldn't rely on anyone else. After the divorce, not even her own mother had contact with her, leaving Claire to care for the children alone. Exhausted from work, she would come home and faint, sobbing into her pillow from helplessness. The fleeting passion she had once felt burned out, leaving her alone amidst the ruins of a life that had never been truly happy. Cheating Secrets podcast like me.